I'm very happy and very honored to welcome 4 distinguished guests on this panel who will have a lot to tell us about one of the key problems in the energy transition in general and the question of nuclear in particular, because as we will see, nuclear is very often seen as a very expensive thing to build that provides then very cheap electricity on the long run. And how we can rethink the way of investing in nuclear and what it means for the future is something I'm going to discuss in greater detail with the distinguished members of the panel. I start with Jonas Kristiansen Nuland, Associate Professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. Jonas, you have looked quite intensely in the calculations of the price, for example, of a megawatt hour, of a kilowatt hour of electricity. And you take issue with some of the dominant calculations that claim that nuclear is too expensive and the alternatives are cheaper. Maybe you can dive a little bit into this.
Yeah, it's this levelized cost of energy. To bring it a little bit back historically, 50 years ago, it was a tool used to calculate the electricity price for firm dispatchable energy sources in a non-deregulated power market. And now this tool has been transformed into being used for non-firm, non-dispatchable power sources in a deregulated power market. So then you get the big confusion here. But I would say, like, when it comes to LCE, in the long term, I think nuclear energy can be very competitive. Like, if you look at nuclear energy on a 100-year time horizon, you consider the time till payback of the first investment. You consider the time when you operate a nuclear power plant that has been paid down, and you also considering lifetime extensions over this 100-year period. The average electricity price needed to cover all costs in this 100-year time frame is just 33 euro per megawatt hour. So it means that actually, if you can climb over this challenge of this front-heavy investment, this is an investment in future generations. It's the only way we can achieve intergenerational justice is to actually invest in nuclear energy. If we don't invest in nuclear energy, we will not get intergenerational justice because we will not be investing in the future generations today. This is a very important topic. Like, we can't only build bikes, we also need to build rail for the future, critical infrastructure.
If you would have to assign blame, let's put it this way, would you say that we have now a lack of competence because we simply did not train the required people, we don't have the engineers? Or would you say the people will still be there, the know-how would still be there, but we have created such a regulatory corset around building nuclear power plants that even though the technological battle has been won, it's the political, the regulatory front on which we are still losing. Well, and by we, I mean the proponents of nuclear energy, of course.
I think that the idea of getting cost-effective nuclear energy, that is a reality already many places in the world. So it's not a hypothesis. We know, like if you look to South Korea, they have always had positive learning when it comes to nuclear. They've never failed. They always get it cheaper and cheaper. And this is like gravity. If you start learning how to do things well, it will be cheap. And I think the key benefit of nuclear energy is that it has a very low material intensity. That means that most of the cost to build it is labor intensive. So there's a huge amount of learning. So I think the main problem for politicians and governments and so on is that they aren't able yet to understand how you can do nuclear well. United Arab Emirates in Baraka, they understood that they need to choose a mature technology, proven technology, instead of first-of-a-kind project. And they need to have a multi-unit project so that they can get scaling effects from this build-out to reduce risks and maybe get better financing. So there's a lot of ways to really understand it instead of trying to not understand it.
When we look at this, and then we look at energy infrastructure and the importance it plays in our daily lives, if we say that energy is everything, that energy is life, should we rely on private investors, or should we actually say, given the initial high capital expenditures, this should be government and state expenditure? If the government says we jump in, we take over, like we use tax money or however they finance it, because this is so crucial for our infrastructure that it just needs to be there, that everything else in the economy derives from the ability and the availability of having reliable and affordable energy. So this is a core offering, a core service the government should provide. Or should we say, no, if the government does it, it's going to take too long and they're going to use the wrong model and it's going to be too expensive. Let the private sector do it. What approach would you prefer?
I think that in Norway, this is a very good example of the hydropower build-outs. Because all of the economists 50 years ago, they said, this will not be profitable, they said. And that's the same economists today saying that hydropower, which is a capital intensive investment, is the most profitable energy source that we have in Norway. So it's because we didn't listen to them 50 years ago. That's the reason why we are in this good position right now. And that's the thing about the discount rate, because with high discount rate, we are discounting the value of future generations. So if you have, let's say, a 7% discount rate, it means that any cheap electricity you produce from year 20 to year 100 has basically no value. And if we would have seen it as a critical infrastructure project to actually achieve net zero and giving a low interest rate, going from 7% to 3%, you get under half the cost of electricity. It's a ridiculous change. And also, if we also include the utilization of energy to electricity, only 33% of the energy goes to electricity. If we can utilize more, let's say we could utilize up to 80%, which is the very optimistic goal of the International Atomic Energy Agency, we could actually reduce the cost 3 times. So you could 6 times, both with rent and with utilization. But then nuclear would be the most cheap electricity source ever.
I think one of the key arguments that is often being made for nuclear is its safety record. We also know that the issue of nuclear waste is one that can be dealt with. But let's assume that we have the quadrupling, maybe a 10-fold expansion of nuclear energy. I mean, wouldn't that also by default increase the likelihood of accidents? Doesn't have to be, a massive world-destroying accident. It's like solar panels, right? The more solar panels you have, the more often it happens that people fall off the roof and break their neck when they install solar panels. And if you have more nuclear power plants, the assumption is the likelihood of accidents happening simply goes up accordingly. Now, do you think that even for long-term investors, that they are, of course, very sensitive to the public opinion? Because as we see, for example, in Austria and Germany, governments tend to, like a flag in the wind, kind of turn with public opinion. Nowadays, we ride on a high, right? Public opinion towards nuclear energy is very high, but many remember that just 5 years ago, it was very low. So if you want to make a long-term investment, can you really rely on the public and governments that are sensitive to what the public thinks, that new sentiment will maintain? What happens if you have one accident, one Fukushima again, or one Chernobyl-like thing? You had the good example. They said 50 years ago, they said, don't do hydro, and now everybody's happy. What if in 20 years, they say, they said do nuclear, and now everybody's unhappy? How can we avoid that from happening?
We should try to prepare a little bit that accidents can come, and that we need to already now start speaking about that. It's actually a logical fallacy. The zero risk bias, logical fallacy. There are people believe that if you say no to nuclear energy, there is no risk. If you say yes to nuclear energy, there is risk. But infallible technologies do not exist. According to the EU Science Panel, nuclear energy has the lowest risk of all energy sources. The biggest accident, that is to say no to nuclear energy. Think about Germany now. The industry is dying out. They could restart the reactors in 1 to 3 years, 80 terawatt hours. That's 2,000 to 3,000 lives of baseload brown coal production. It's a big accident. So we need to talk about the real accident. The real accident is to say no to nuclear energy. The real accident is not to say yes, even though minor things can happen in the future.
So you're basically saying nuclear is like asking someone out on a date. It's either no risk or the ultimate risk, but there's nothing in between.
Jonas, you made a very good point that as we have more nuclear power generation systems, the likelihood of something might go wrong will naturally increase, right? But the important point they've mentioned was we can prepare the public, right? How do we prepare the public in the most efficient way so that if something goes wrong, there's not a mass hysteria that we have seen in the past? Is there any thoughts or insights in terms of education or being transparent that we could do to make it aware more broadly?
That's a great point. I think what I said about this zero risk bias, I see even professors at my department at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, even them aren't understanding their logical fallacy of zero risk bias. So they talk to people who work on nuclear energy as if the only way they could accept nuclear energy is an infallible technology. So they make like impossible target for nuclear people, and they have no standard for themselves. We shouldn't accept that, I think, and we should maybe talk more about the statistics and what actually no to nuclear have cost worldwide. Look at Europe now. It was 1/3 of the world economy. Now it's 1/6. And if we don't have Europe is deindustrializing fast speed. If Europe don't focus on actually the power sources that are needed to keep up their economical standards, Europe will be in ruin. So we need to talk about that as well, that having non-cost-effective, no firm power sources, it has been catastrophic to Europe. That's also a risk, that we don't focus on the energy mix that the other parts of the world are focusing on.
Thank you.